Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another Sabbath Insight with Chief Yuya. And of course, you are tuned into the ANU Life Global Ministries and all of our shares that we provide to you, of course, gratis. I want to encourage you all to go to the website and pick up your free copy of the ANU Way, free copy of the Mikveh, instructions for those of you who know that you're in that space where you need that spiritual cleansing and that resetting, even consistently. If you need to do that every 7 days or every day, there's some instructions in there on how to do a very accessible and simple spiritual cleanse, as well as the Al Shabbat guide as well. We're teaching you how to properly bring in and guard the Sabbath, the seventh day experience and ritual. And as some of you have noted to me that there's Arabic as well in the Al Shabbat. Of course, there's Arabic. Of course, understanding the relationship between the Shemitic languages is important, and how to use them to invoke our highest entities and highest ideas that guard us and guide us, So definitely get a copy of that, the ANU Glossary, the ANU Way, and you can also, if you sign up for the newsletter, you can get a copy of the Shekinah ritual, bringing in that feminine energy and power and spirit of the Shekinah. So, as we're meeting again in our sacred time that we call this insight, there was a segment that I did a while ago where I spoke about the Twilight, that time between the breathing of worlds, where there's a breath between this dimension and the next, where there's a stillness that stretches thin enough for truth to step through, between the beat and the rhythm. And that's the realm of the seer, or the realm of the empath, the awakened one. That's who I'm speaking to in this segment. I was just going through some meditations, and I felt myself feeling a great compassion and a great concern for all of those who are a bit more awakened than many in their environment. It's a rough thing at times. We get into that shooting the messenger sort of paradigm where you're faulted because you see. It becomes less about what you're seeing and the fact that you can see it or you can feel it. And there are people out there who feel what others hide. And in this insight, I want to share that dawning. We spoke about the difference between dawning and morning in a recent insight, but that dawning that you have is not about fleeing the gift. It's about learning how to live with it. Live with your gift of empathy. Live with your gift of sight. The beautiful gift of being awakened, learning to live with it, to see without seizing, and to carry light without carrying everyone's load. Sometimes that can be the big challenge. And I tell you, for me, it took me many, 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 many years. In fact, so many years that I'm still working on that lesson. I haven't graduated as of yet. So I'm speaking as an advanced student in the art of seeing without seizing, or witnessing light without carrying the load. When you look at the book of Ecclesiasticus, it says the eyes of the Most High are 10,000 times brighter than the sun. So if you think about it, to even see a spark of that brightness is to hold fire in very fragile hands. It can illuminate, but it can also consume. When you think about fire, there's a weight to divine sight. There's a weight that comes along with it. there's a gravity that pulls illusion away from the truth. And when your perception widens, your presence then becomes a mirror. And, not everyone welcomes mirrors. I know some people who love mirrors and they put them in their homes and they just like how they look and they like looking at themselves. And then you have people who don't like to see themselves in the mirror. I've spoken to people before who don't even like to look in their own eyes in the mirror, like when they're in the bathroom mirror. They spoke about how uncomfortable it feels, So when you gain greater and elevated perception, you become like a mirror. Some people welcome you and some people despise you. The soul that is unready, it resents reflection. When you have a personality, individual that is undeveloped, they resent reflection because in the mirror of a seer, their mask begins to melt and their pretense loses its shape. So a lot of times those who carry vision, they often walk alone. You may be one of those people who you may know a lot of people. Few people know you, but you find yourself in isolation most often. You find yourself alone most often because your light exposes people and your exposure of people tends to isolate you. It makes me think about this story that talks about Lao Tzu. And Lao Tzu, he once walked past a pool. And it's this pool where like the soldiers they were watering their horses. And the waters were like turning and churning and it was brown and it was loud and the water was splashing against the banks. And he told them, Lao Tzu, he told them, you cannot see your reflection in running water. So then later, when they finished washing the horses and everything, and the pool had settled, and the surface became as still as glass, he said, now you may know yourselves. So when you look at that parable, which I've always appreciated, you can only know yourself with the awakened mind. And when emotion stirs, clarity hides. I think that rhymed when I just said. That wasn't intentional. But when desire begins to thrash truth, and thrash facts, your desire, that truth and those facts, they begin to disappear beneath the waves. You see, when we still, are in a current, when our breath becomes rhythm, as I spoke about in our last segment, the evening the breath, and our thought becomes quiet, the waters of consciousness clear, and the face of truth begins to reveal itself without much effort. The Torah talks about the same sort of idea when you read in Bereshit, the story of creation, when it says, and the spirit of the Elohim moved upon the face of the waters. That's Genesis 1 and 2. It was, or Bereshit 1 and 2. It was only after the waters were gathered and ordered that the light began to emerge. So order invites illumination. It's the same way that if you're a seer, the seer has to gather the scattered waters of their emotions, the longing, the fear, the anger, even the compassion, and place them within sacred boundaries, right? And only once those emotions are placed within sacred boundaries, can light then pass through without any distortions? Again, it's like looking in the water, trying to see your reflection, and you have all these waters splashing and going all over, and the brown earth at the bottom of the lake or the river is coming up and it's clouding the water, and you're looking for clarity, but you have to still those emotions first. Clear seeing is not a sudden miracle, as people may think. It's a discipline. When you see things clearly, it's because you're living a disciplined sort of life. And that requires patience. It requires the patience of that lake that learns not to chase the wind, right? You think about, again, a water surface. When there's wind all over the place, it's ripples, it's waves, the water is chasing each current of ruach, or each current of breath or spirit. The mind has to be trained to stop reacting and to observe without drowning in what it observes. That's the key. Perception is magnetic. So whenever you look upon something deeply, you begin to draw yourself, you begin to draw into yourself, rather. If you gaze at chaos, chaos begins to vibrate inside of your blood. If you gaze at peace, peace then becomes like the rhythm and the pulse of your heart. And that's why stillness is not necessarily inactivity, it's sovereignty. It's how the seer protects their vision from the storm of emotions. That's not an easy thing. When you see people who are wrapped up in the torrent of what it is that they're feeling, this is not someone who's necessarily adept at seeing. That may not be their ministry to see. The danger of clear sight or clear seeing, it doesn't necessarily lie in the sight itself. It lies in our failure to prepare the vessel that's going to hold that sight. So when the mind is untrained, truth floods it, like, shining a floodlight into a dark room all of a sudden. What's going to happen if you're in a dark room, right, and someone comes in with a floodlight and lights it up like a football stadium? Your eyes will begin to hurt. Your heart begins to race. It's a very scary feeling. It's like when you're driving down a dark road and all of a sudden you see police lights behind you. It's, it's shocking. But when your breath is disciplined and humility is building your vessel, that light now becomes guidance. It doesn't become a glare, it becomes guidance. So the call of the awakened is simple. Do not fear the brightness, prepare for it. Still your waters and let truth rise to meet you, just like the dawn meets over a lake. When we talk about Yahushua walking on water, in that horizon or that horizon we speak about, when we see the sun across that horizon, that's the stillness of the water meeting the truth of the light. One of the worst things you could do is chase revelation. That's how so many great civilizations fell, by making deals with artificial spirits, with disembodied spirits, with the fallen ones. I don't need to know now. I want to know now. When you chase revelation, you lose the calmness that allows it to appear. The only way things are revealed to you is when you're calm. For some of you, you probably have this thing. Most of your answers of life come to you when you're in the shower, or when you're jogging, or when you're swimming, because there's a calmness that comes over you. Or you go to the ocean, you go out into the woods. You might be like me, you like to go to the train tracks, but you go to your place of calm, and then the revelation begins or appears. It's like Lao Tzu's mirror pool. When Lao Tzu, your awareness will reflect without distortion in that moment. And in that time, that's when the voice of the Elohim will speak within the silence you've already made, right? So the silence itself becomes a sort of a bed for revelation. It's important to understand that there are 4 instruments to creation. Yetzirah, right? Now, Yetzirah may sound familiar to some of you who know Kabbalah. Yetzirah is your image. It's your vision. The vision is the forming of the world when you see the end from the beginning, right? You've heard me speak about this before, where I've said the Most High sees us at our end, not at our beginning, right? So you might look at a person and you say, oh man, this person's so horrible, and they do this bad thing, they do this horrible thing, that horrible thing. But if you're looking from a divine eye, you're looking with that Yetzirah. And that Yetzirah says, but I see the end. So you might see the end the moment you meet a person. It's like I spoke about in the last session, Evangelist Delagal. I kept calling her Prophetess Delagal. I realized afterwards she didn't refer to herself as a prophetess. She was evangelist, or is. I don't know if she's still walking physically on the earth. But she would always call me man of wisdom, right? I'm 15 years old, and she, hey, man of wisdom, good afternoon, man of wisdom, right? So in that instance, I'm not saying I'm a man of wisdom, but I know a little something. But she saw my end at the very beginning. The first day she met me, she saw my end, right? That's the Yetzirah vision. Then you have Lev. Lev, for those of you who've been working on your Hebrew, is heart. It's the emotion. It's the power source. It's when you feel that state that you have witnessed in your Yetzirah, your vision, is already true. That's your heart, your Lev. Like I see it and I feel it. It's real, Then you have the Ruach. The Ruach is your breath. That's your spirit center. It's when you match your inhale and your exhale to what it is that you have affirmed, right? So you see it with your Yetzirah, you feel it with your Lev or your heart, and then you match it with your breath or your Ruach. Then from there, you have what's called the bar. The bar means word, or it translates as word. It's the sound, it's the seal that we speak rhythmically. So now our tone clothes the thought. So we began with a vision, Yetzirah. Then that vision induces a feeling in our heart, Lev, where it's like, yeah, that's it. Then from there, we breathe, Ruach. This becomes a real thing. We're breathing our spirit into it. Then we say it. There's the bar or the makaru, as we say in the Medu Netir, the words of power. So each step mirrors that same, when you look at the story of Lao Tzu, the same stilling of the pool, each step. You have your image, your feeling, your breath and sound, and they're all moving as one. That's a divine psychology. It's the self-hypnosis of creation. Sometimes within that psychological sort of paradigm, we feel like we see too much. The eyes of the awakened don't just look, but they drink. Every time we glance at something, every vibration we feel, every unspoken word becomes like water poured into your inner vessel. And if you don't pour something back into the earth, what happens is you begin to drown in what you've taken in. This is why sometimes people who are empathic or seers, they have trouble in crowded spaces. because they need to release. I had advised a sister actually a couple of days ago. It's going through some challenges. And I said, you need to hug some trees. She's never done it before, but she will, and I said, it works. Trust me. I said, you have to release. You're taking in a lot and you have to discharge. You got to release it. I'm a firm advocate of tree hugging. I know it seems like a hippie activity or whatever, but those hippies had, they were onto some things and they didn't invent it, you know. But when you have a heart that feels deeply, um, when you're a person who loves deeply and intensely, it's the heart that feels so deep that it becomes a sanctuary, but it becomes a sponge at the same time. It doesn't just gather the light of others, but it also gathers the shadows of others. So it's gathering their grief, it's gathering their doubts, it's gathering the hidden guilt that people have. So you start to carry emotions that are not even yours, and then you call that empathy. But in truth, it's unfiltered absorption. When you read in Second Ezra's, it says, "Set thine house in order." You know, comfort such as be in trouble, and now renounce corruption. That was advice or guidance, more so. It was counsel to someone who was a seer, saying that your first duty is to set your inner order, like your inner self, in order, because you're about to go out there and you're about to see evil that you can't imagine. That the scripture talks about that afterwards. But it's saying first you got to get yourself right. The seer's first duty is the inner order. And that's the only way that the balance can then balance others. Balanced people balance other people. So to heal the world, you first have to drain the flood that exists inside of you. I remember years ago studying about the Aboriginal people and reading about the rainbow serpent. That's the rainbow serpent that sleeps beneath the earth. I did a segment on this years ago. It's somewhere. It's either on YouTube or somewhere out there. But I spoke about Osumare, the rainbow serpent, and then I correlated it with the Aboriginal rainbow serpent. But that story talks about in their system, when the rainbow serpent woke up and it stretched, rivers were then born, and its movement gave life to the dry land. But when the people started arguing and taking more than they needed and ignoring that sacred flow, the serpent thrashed in sorrow, and the waters rose up, and there was a flood, and the valleys were flooded until the people remembered rhythm again. So they teach that the serpent then coils itself within each of us, right? It's the current of our feelings. It's the sacred energy that animates our desires and animates our breath. So when we move with the law of rhythm, we're giving and we're receiving, we're inhaling, we're exhaling, then our internal rivers, they get to stay clear. But when emotion swells without containment, when compassion becomes compulsion, the waters rise up again, and they rise up against their banks, and the soul or the spirit, it drowns in its own empathy. When you look at Bereshit 1:6, when it talks about Elohim separated the waters above from the waters below, that was a sort of cosmic act of boundaries and balance, where creation begins with distinction. There's an upper emotion and there's a lower emotion. Intuition, instinct, spirit, form. So we should, our internal waters the same way. You have to let empathy remain compassion and not consumption. You let your love flow, but don't let it flood. So to feed all things is divine. To feel all things is divine. To control that feeling with a rhythm is mastery. Sometimes we get stuck in the divine part. I'm an empath. I feel everything. Cool. That's great. It's a gift. But that gift can become a curse if you don't learn to wield it with proficiency. Because sometimes you'll develop this sort of compulsion to do something about everything you feel or something about everything you see instead of learning just to hold space for it. You know, when your inner rainbow serpent moves in peace, your words, they start to carry healing, not heaviness. And your emotional tides become very measured. You know, your presence is like a calm water where others, they start to see their own reflection in you because of that calmness. So you have to balance the waters within, and then you'll have peace outside. That's how it sort of flows, you know, or follows. You know, when the inner waters calm, the seer regains that true sight, that proper sight. You begin to understand that compassion doesn't require you to collapse yourself. You know, you can be aware of another person's pain without becoming the container for someone else's pain. Or you can feel the river flow through you without mistaking it for your own tears. You know, conscious distance, it doesn't necessarily mean detachment. It's a discipline, and it's a discipline in love. You know, it's the art of remaining close enough to feel, but far enough to see clearly. You know, our ancestors, they expressed that through the law of rhythm. You know, every wave that rises has to also fall. And every inhalation has to also meet with an exhalation. So without that sort of symmetry, even creation would gasp. You talk about symmetry. Look at Ecclesiasticus 3:3, where it says, look upon all the works of the Most High, and there are two and two, one against another. That's talking about the laws of balance. You know, balance was written into the world code itself. You know, there's heat, there's coolness, there's night, there's dawn, there's movement, there's rest. You know, so when you live without rhythm, you're rebelling against the code of creation. So when emotion threatens to sort of overflow, as sometimes rivers do, when it meets a stone curve, it slows down and it keeps moving. So you don't fight the current, you redirect it. You know, you let the vessel sort of be something powerful. If you could picture your awareness as a bowl of still water, the bowl itself is a boundary, right? And if the bowl cracks, the water spills. If the bowl is sealed too tight, the water stagnates. So your task as a seer is to maintain both porous edges and protected form. When you engage with others, you have to notice the tide. Does your energy rise or does your energy recede? Are you giving freely or are you being pulled by the undertow? You know, each conversation, each glance, each cause that you serve should end with the same question. Do I feel emptied or do I feel expanded? If you feel empty, you have sort of crossed from compassion into consumption. If you feel expanded, you've practiced conscious distance effectively. You look at the book of Maccabees, there's a scripture, I think 7th chapter, where it says, the Most High gave them breath and life again, for now he shapes each spirit anew. You know, this is talking about the Ruach within you is actually renewable, but it's only if you allow space between inhalations. You know, even the spirit, the Ruach, has to rest between its own movements, you know, and there's certain ways we cultivate that rhythm. You know, one, you have 7 breaths, right? One way you could do is, you know, I teach people practice. I am, inhale, becoming. I am, becoming. Do that 7 times. If you listen closely, you'll start to hear the C sort of moving in your chest, I've noticed. There's the mirror command where you gaze into your own reflection and you say, I am peace. I am clarity. I am law. I see, but I do not seize. I care, but I do not carry. So the eyes remind the heart of its own boundaries in that sense. There's a Jacob ladder visualization that I do with my clients where we descend through wisdom, strength, patience, love. And then when we get to the base, we say, I dwell in Elohim. I create in peace. And you rise again, lightened, breathing harmony back into form. Also, another very powerful ritual I do with the children a lot. I do a renaming ritual. This is where you name the storm you've been hosting. A lot of us host storms, man. Especially a lot of you Oshun women. You host storms. You host a lot of fear. You host a lot of anger. And you host a lot of guilt. And when you rename it, you put a more productive spin on it. So fear can be renamed as awareness. And guilt can be renamed as accountability. And strength, or rather anger, can be renamed as strength. So what happens is that you start to understand the science of how names redirect power. And the titles teach the energy where to go. You know, it's like working at a mail slot, or, you know, the mail comes in and it could be a big mess on the floor, or you could redirect where it's going to go. The power and the energy is going to come in anyway. The anger is going to come in. You know, the guilt's going to come in. What do I do with this guilt? Accountability. That's where we're going to flood that into. Oh, I'm afraid. I feel this fear. Okay, I'm aware. I'm aware of what's going on around me. There's a value in that. There's also the not mine release. I also do that with youth as well. When you feel another's heaviness clinging to your field, exhale softly. Not mine. Return to source and peace. Not mine. You know, I taught that long ago where I talked about volleying. Some of you may remember that lesson. Someone knocks the ball, you just bounce it right back. You don't have to catch the volleyball. You hit it right back over the fence. You know, but you return it to the source in peace. So you let the waters that belong to others return to their river. You know, it's only right. You know, there's a form that we call that. It's called Wu Wei. I feel like I spoke about that recently. But Wu Wei, there's a certain rhythm that it's called effortless action. And it's a movement that's sort of guided by awareness and not by anxiety. You know, so you act without strain. You feel without that sort of psychic drowning I spoke about in Grasping the Root of Divine Power. And like in this insight where I'm speaking about, you learn how to help without absorbing. So that's how prophets walk. And that's how empaths have to walk. When you learn to live that way, every interaction that you have becomes a ceremony. You stop rescuing people all the time and you start reminding them of their own breath. You stop carrying worlds like your atlas and you start spinning them back into their own orbit. You know, you got to breathe, you got to center, you have to contain your own waters within, and you let rhythm replace reaction. You let peace become your permanent vibration. So when heaviness starts to come, you say, not mine. Return to the source in peace, not mine. There's an alchemical science there of the words and the breath, you know, that once entered within waters, you know, creation begins when that breath enters in the water. Not ordinary speech, you know, when there's words, but that measured sort of sound that has the power to shape matter. Every utterance out of your mouth is architecture. You may not know that, but every exhale is an energy taking form. So our ancestors across nations, they understood that. So in the Torah, where you have dabar, which means or translates as word and thing, in divine language, there's no separation between what is spoken and what is created. So they had one word for word, dabar. It's word and thing. So to say a thing is to call it forth. To speak without consciousness is to scatter the stones that you would use for building into chaos. Look at Solomon, the wisdom of Solomon. We said, thou hast ordered all things in measure and number and weight. Your words, they carry the same order. Your words have a measure. Your words have number. Your words have weight. So when your emotions tend to run high and structure is absent, your vibration just becomes noise. When your heart, your breath, and your words align, your vibration becomes law. In the East, like Indus Kush, different places, they call that prana shakti. That was a harmony. Prana shakti is the living breath that animates sound. So they taught, within that system that the creator didn't just speak with a tongue, but the creator speaks with an exhalation. And the very first syllable that the creator spoke was Om. Om. Right? I think I did an Om chant in Black Orpheus, the song I did. But Om is said to be the hum that vibrates or sounds beneath the surface of the earth. If you quiet yourself enough, and I have heard it, I used to hear it as a child all the time. And I remember I would ask adults what that sound was, and they told me that I had pressure built up in my ear. And they used to tell me to take my finger in my ear and do that. So I would say, "What's that sound?" I'm all, and they'd be like, "What's it sound like?" I would say, "It goes up and down. It's like and and they would say, "Oh, that's just pressure in your ear." They gave me what they had. But our ancestors in that region said that if a person's breath becomes as steady as the universe's pulse, they too will become creators. When you look at the Aboriginal sciences, they taught the same thing through song lines. They said they talked about this. The song lines were these tracks that sung across the continent, and it called rivers and trees and animals into being. It was like a song that was moving through the earth. So each tone corresponded to a mountain or to a different direction or to a different star. And they said that the world has to be sung daily or it begins to fade. So sound keeps existence alive. I was just thought that was like so beautiful, man. Each thing that manifests has its own tone. And we should have such loving care for what we've been called to be stewards over, that we sing its tone every single day. So this is something that's echoed, every time we speak a blessing or we speak a decree, every time we say I am, that's a world that's taking shape. Every complaint is a shadow that reasserts itself in form. So you can choose rhythm over reaction, or you can choose a tone over attention. No, when I say tension, I'm not saying attention. You can choose tone over tension. When you align your breath with intention, you become the mouth of creation. When you align your personal tone with peace, You become the heartbeat of creation. In Kabbalic form, it is said that the Elohim formed humanity by breathing into dust, not just air, but the resonance of the name. So the name still vibrates through the nostrils of the living. So each of us exhales divine frequency. And this is why breath that's controlled it's not just wellness, but it's worship. In ancient Tameri, this was expressed through Tahuti. Tahuti was the keeper of sacred speech, measure, the balancing of Ma'at. And Tahuti recorded every word uttered by the Necharu and men, because every syllable tipped the scales towards order or towards disorder. So Tahuti taught that a word unmeasured is a feather that's fallen out of place, but a word spoken in truth restores cosmic balance. So same thing for us. When you speak, you're not releasing just air, you're releasing architecture. Your lungs are like instruments. Your tongue becomes like a chisel. Like you're sculpting out the word. So your tone is the builder's line of what you're sculpting. So every declaration, whether you whisper it or you shout it, it etches a new pattern in the unseen world where the seen world receives its instructions from. So if your heart is stormy and it's overflooding, your words will carry thunder. If your heart is still and your words are at peace, they'll carry light. So before you speak, you should always breathe. Let your water settle. Let your pulse steady. Let the name rise inside you, like it does in the dawn. Then speak softly. Speak deliberately. Speak as someone who has weighed sound and found it worthy, right? Sometimes people love to hear themselves speak. They love to filibuster and to hold the floor. But is your sound worthy? This is why sometimes I take long gaps. You'll see me, I'll do a podcast series or something, then I'll stop for like a year or two. I don't feel like in that format or that medium, I have a sound that's worthy of sharing. So I wait until I feel like I do. And sometimes the medium changes. I haven't done a Chief Yuya podcast in how long? 2-3 years, at least, or maybe longer. The waters are not flowing in that direction right now. The waters are flowing in this direction. That's the secret of the silent monk. There was a story when a warlord demanded a blessing. The monk then only bowed and exhaled. And that exhale was not a refusal of what the warlord wanted. It was a transmission. This is some ancient Japanese parable, So what that's saying without words is that peace is stronger than dominance. Presence is more mighty than someone's command. So that's what they call the Ishin Denshin. And also in Buddhist science, Ishin Denshin is the heart-to-heart communication beyond language. So the alchemy of word and breath is very simple, but it's very sacred. Your breath carries your will, and sound carries your law, and silence carries both of them. So when those three things are united, when the seer's breath is calm, the word is pure, and the silence is very deliberate, then your human voice becomes like this divine trumpet. It's like a shofar, it becomes an instrument. You're not speaking anymore to persuade, you're speaking to create. So your breath doesn't become a tool for survival. Your breath becomes a tool to sculpt reality. When you inhale, you're gathering unseen power. And when you exhale, you're sending out shape. That's the rhythm of the universe echoing through your own chest. You know, you can allow your words to become medicine. You can allow your very breath to become one's prayer. Or your silence could be someone's sanctuary. You know, I want to give encouragement to all you empaths out there who've been going through, you know, every heart that feels too deeply, or every spirit who tastes the moods of every room before anybody speaks a word. You know, you're made strong, but you were made wide. Your sensitivity is not fragility. It's a design. You know, you're crafted as this instrument that's tuned to detect imbalance. So you can bring the tone of peace back into the field. You know, so when you absorb another sadness, you're not meant to keep it. You're meant to refine that sadness. You know, when you feel someone's anger and it trembles in your chest, it's a raw metal that wants you to forge it through your breath. You know, so you have to breathe it through your four instruments, right? That I mentioned earlier. Yetzirah, image. You know, that's the light entering to what was once heavy. You know, you see the doorway of wisdom. Then you have Lev, the heart. You feel the vibration of compassion, but you don't let vibration transmute. You don't let compassion transmute into pity. You feel that steady warmth that says, I see you and I stand. Then you have your Ruach, your breath. You know, you inhale what is true, you exhale what is false. You breathe until sorrow loses its name and it becomes a song. Then there's the bar, which is the word, right? You're whispering victory over every vibration that once had you shook or once frightened you, right? Let your decree sort of rewrite that energy, if you will, or that those words rewrite the energy around you. You know, every exhalation becomes that release, and every spoken truth, it transforms things around you. That's how empaths heal, not by holding somebody else's pain. You'll destroy yourself that way. You know, you have to allow breath and sound to alchemicalize into clarity. You know, again, considering the rainbow serpent, it's flooded when harmony was lost. You know, but when balance returned, it became a river again. Right. So that's a very simple lesson, that motion must be governed by rhythm. You know, you are the river, you know, so you have to keep moving, keep things moving, but always remember the same thing as the silent monk who offered a blessing through one breath. He proved that the calmest vibration carries the deepest impact. So your stillness is your sword. Your composure then becomes like, that's what makes you royal. It's the crown. When you look at the wisdom of Solomon, it says, chapter 3, it says, having been a little chastised, they shall be greatly rewarded, for the Most High proved them and found them worthy for himself. In the time of their visitation, they shall shine and run to and fro like sparks among the stubble, right? Slightly paraphrasing. But we're that spark. We're bright enough to see in the darkness. We're steady enough to light others without losing ourselves. You know, so every tear that you have transmutes or should transmute into understanding. And that's a gem of your diadem, of your cloud, or your crown of your becoming. Every burden that you have, release it. You know, you got to release it with grace, you know, and that's how the kingdom restores balance. You are not a victim of vibration. You become a master of resonance. Don't react to frequencies. Recalibrate frequencies. You don't have to drown in anyone else's emotion. I know, and some people really try hard to get you to. They'll work. Don't drown in other people's emotions. Redirect that current. So as empaths and seers, we have to be walking proof that awareness itself is the victory. Our peace is evidence of how power can be used rightly. When you breathe, don't breathe and meditate to escape the world, but do it to remind the world that calm can still exist here. Okay? So I'll share a little bit more on this. I had a meditation I was thinking about giving you to help you to understand how to embody understanding and where the waters meet, from the waters above to the waters below. But I think this is enough for now. We'll do the meditation at another time. But I want to just give a word of encouragement to all of you empaths and seers and healers, who are going through these spiritual exchanges. And willfully, you've learned something through this, how to stay soft, but keep your vessel firm at the same time, and to transmute what it is you're receiving. Because I know sometimes you want to give up. You was like, man, this is too much. It's tearing me up. It's tearing me down. I knew a sister years ago from Philadelphia. She used to work with me a lot, just counsel and stuff. And she used to have these really severe seizures from feeling other people's stuff, and it was, man, she used to go through. She had a gift of real empathy, because there's a lot of people that say, oh, I'm an empath. They're not. Just because you got some rocks and some incense doesn't make you now a mystic. Most people who have the gift, they struggle between that gift being a gift and an actual curse. It's tough. It's tough when you see what no one else sees, or when you feel what people think they're hiding. It's tough, man. It's tough to not know when to sit still and observe, as opposed to when to jump in and say something or try to help. And you start to understand rhythm, or you try to learn rhythm. Maybe now is not the time for this person to make this transformation. Even though I see it and I see what the issue is, maybe I'm just supposed to be here and to establish a relationship and experience of acceptance, and accept the fact that they're on a journey and that they're going to come to their next plateau in their own time. It's a lesson that takes a long time for a lot of empaths, and for a lot of people who channel the spirit, where they can become a bridge between different realms, or like a living ladder of light, if you will. But in order to properly do that, you have to still the waters. There may be emotions that rise up when you see things, but you can't chase them. You can't label them. You have to let them drift. Just like you see clouds sometimes in the sky and they just drift by. If heaviness lingers from other stories, you got to see it as like dark smoke above the water. And every time you exhale gently across the surface of the water, the smoke dissolves into nothingness. That's you releasing what's not yours. I release what's not mine. I return it to the source in peace. Then say to yourself, only what is of love may remain. You're establishing the boundary. That's an awareness you have to rest in. That's a heartbeat that you rest in. It's the same rhythm that pulses through the stars, that pulses through oceans. It's the beat of a covenant between a creator and its creation. It's a reminder that, you're not separate from the law that governs all things, regardless of how talented you may be in your visions or in your ability to feel. You have to be able to visualize your own ruach, your own breath, as a current of clear water flowing upward through your spine, with each inhale, and with each exhale, it releases light into the heavens. You're the rainbow serpent. You're the river. Don't forget it. But you got to be at peace, or a flood will come. Every breath that you take renews the world around you. I know it's heavy. But those of you who are walking this path, and some of you may not call yourself empaths or seers. Some of you may just call yourself therapists or psychologists or psychiatrists, because that's the language that you have. But you don't know why you're so good at what you do. Why are you able to diagnose so quickly? Or when you're doing evaluations, why you can look at the form that you're filling out when you're doing the evaluation, and you could see like what's happening there with the person you're speaking to, the client. Like, it's far beyond what the form even has boxes for. You may not have realized that you have that empathic ability, but you have to learn to alchemicalize it. So you, as a seer, you now become the sun. I'll share that meditation in a separate video, I think, maybe by itself. I want to thank you for being present and for carrying this rhythm with me. And I just affirm that all your conversations that you have flow through movement, flow through work, flow through rest, that you breathe on purpose, and that you become the living breath that exists between worlds. I would just say, just remember the pattern. Creation begins in silence, and it moves through breath, and it ends in the word. So whether you're looking at Lao Tzu's still pool, you have to let your mind rest until the reflection is clear. If you're looking at the rainbow serpent, you have to move with the rhythm, never rage, and let your motion give birth to rivers, not floods. If you're looking at the silent monk aspect, speak only when your heart and your breath agree with each other. You can bless a nation. In the Torah, Elohim said 7 times, and Elohim said, and Elohim said, and Elohim said, and so it was. Therefore, let your words be so. So they're not scattered, but they're sealed. Ecclesiastes says, look upon the rainbow and praise him that made it. Very beautiful it is in its brightness. You're the brightness when your inner waters are actually balanced. So I would just say, let your Yetzirah, your image, remain luminous. Your Lev, your heart, be steady and compassion. Your Ruach, be clean and rhythmic. And your Dabar, be anchored in truth. So you walk as the breath between worlds. Calm, humble, silent, and alive in peace. John 1:5, the light shined in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. So you have to carry that light back into the world, breathe it into every space, speak it into every storm. And whenever confusion reigns, let your stillness be the restoration of order. All right, family, you're balanced, you're blessed, and you are the rhythm that lives of the Most High creators in flesh. I promise you that. I'm not lying. All right. Until next time, thank you so much for spending this time, and willfully this sparked something and brought some healing to those of you who are healers and seers. I'm with you. I know it gets rough, but let this be a blessing and your gift not be a curse until such time. All right. Shalom Aleichem.